International webinar on the phenomenology of consciousness, Indian and Western perspective, jointly organized by Chennai Philosophical Forum and Philosophy Family National Forum. Chennai Philosophical Forum is celebrating its 12th annual celebration. That is 12th year. It has completed 12th year. It was started in the year 2013 by Professor R. Balasubramanian and me. And we have been conducting meeting every month. And also we have published a few books, one on science, philosophy and technology, and other on the contributions of Indian philosophers. So I'm grateful to all of you for joining this meeting. And we have been getting support from all of you. That's why we are able to conduct seminars and symposium one after other. Last year, we organized one research scholars seminar on the theme philosophy and social responsibility. And two best presentations were selected, and we gave them special prize. And today is a very important event. CPF as well as Philosophy Family is organizing this very important webinar on phenomenology of consciousness. I take this opportunity to welcome our respected speakers, Professor R.C. Sinha ji, who is a former chairman of ICPR and also is a very close associate of Chennai Philosophical Forum. He is a well-known scholar. Recently, he is in Shimla Institute as a national fellow. We are very grateful to him for kindly accepting our invitation to deliver the presidential address. Similarly, we have Professor R.P. Singh, who will be joining us very soon. He will be delivering this inaugural address today. And we thank him for, he is there. Professor, good morning, Professor.
Good morning, sir.
And the keynote address will be delivered by Professor Ramesh Chandra Pradhan, who is a well-known scholar, and he has already joined. He will be delivering the keynote address. He is one of the eminent philosophers of this country, and we are grateful to him for kindly joining. And also we have one young scholar from USA. He's Satya Pradhan. He last year joined in IPC also. He's a well-known scholar. He would be talking on Advaitic metaphysics. And also we have a speaker from Thailand, Professor Suraj. He's a very recognized philosopher, and his contribution to phenomenology and other disciplines is very important. And also he's one who used to participate in our various programs. In fact, Professor Suraj has been organizing one international seminar. Recently had organized a second international seminar on comparative philosophy. I'm happy that he has joined. And Professor Shikala Nair, she will also make a presentation. She's a well-known scholar. Similarly, we have Professor Sampong from Thailand. He worked on Heidegger and Husserl and Buddhism. He's a well-known scholar. I'm very happy that he has joined. And also Professor Pramod Kumar Das, who has been helping us a lot by this philosophy family by having weekly meetings and inviting all teachers of philosophy to deliver lectures. And also we have Ranjan Kumar Panda from IIT Mumbai. He's a recognized philosopher of India, and also recently he has, I think the book is yet to come. He has edited a beautiful volume on Sankhya Yoga theory of consciousness. And we have Michael Stam from Denmark. He recently published a book on Heidegger and Indian philosophical tradition, especially Advaita Vedanta. And we have one more scholar from China, Professor C.P. Hertog. He has made a special contribution to Vipassana meditation, and he is making some attempt to understand Vipassana meditation from Western standpoint. I heard him speaking in one seminar. It is good that different perspectives are available in this presentation, various presentation. So let me very briefly give a theme note. Of course, there are great scholars who will be discussing this theme, but let me very briefly give a note on this theme. Actually, there are three important turns in philosophy in the 20th century. One is a linguistic turn, which is due to Wittgenstein, and there is hermeneutical turn due to Heidegger and Gadamer, and third is a cognitive turn by Jerry Fodor, Churchland, and Dennett, and many others, of course. So the interrelation among these three turns are well known, and the cognitive turn in philosophy has been playing a very important role. I would say that there is a re-emergence of consciousness studies as one of the important problems of philosophy. This is seen from scientific as well as philosophical side. Scientific community as well as philosophical community are discussing this in detail. For example, when I say scientific community, I would like to mention Dr. A.K. Mukhopadhyay, Professor R.P. Singh knows him very well. He is Delhi. He's a doctor, medical doctor, but he has contributed substantially for this scientific approach to consciousness. And also we have great scholars like B.V. Srikantan, Rajesh Kasuri Rangan, etc. All these scholars have seen, or they made it their approach to see consciousness from the scientific side. Of course, from the philosophical side also, we have great scholars like Jayan Mohanty, Professor R. Balasubramaniam, Veena Gupta, and many others who have made some special effort in analyzing consciousness from the philosophical side. I mentioned only few scholars. So this is very important subject, the phenomenology of consciousness. But what we have to remember in mind is the relation between qualia and consciousness is one of the important issues in cognitive science. Though some defended the thesis that to be conscious means to have a qualia, I'm quoting David Rosenthal, and some questioned the nature of this statement. The view that to be conscious means to have qualia implies a qualitative type of consciousness. Nagel, for example, argues that an organism has conscious mental states even only if there are something that is like to be underlined, that organism, something it is like for the organism. So the significance of consciousness has attained a special status after phenomenological approach made by Brentano and Husserl, Heidegger, Sartre, and many others. The phenomenological method actually explains the significance of consciousness in a philosophical way. Of course, it is associated with others, that is consciousness, experience, sensations, qualia, subjective interpretation, reflection, etc. So I always see that there are two ways in which phenomenology can operate or can be approached. One is from the first person perspective, and the second one is from the third person perspective. For example, the behaviorists have challenged the first person perspective, but the behaviorists have lost its significance, and hence there is a relook of the problem by the cognitive science. And here one has to mention Daniel Dennett for his important contribution on the third person perspective of phenomenology, especially his book Consciousness Explained, it is a very important book because it argues in favor of the method of heterophenomenology. Of course, heterophenomenology here means the third person perspective, which according to him is a right method of studying consciousness. So, heterophenomenology is a method of a phenomenological description that can do, according to him, justice to the most private and affable subjective experience. It has objectivity, neutrality, and respect for the heterophenomenological subject. So, this is something very unique, I would say, that heterophenomenology. In fact, I have made some attempt to study phenomenology from Indian perspective, and I feel the Advaitic perspective comes very close to the first person perspective, whereas the Buddhist approach to phenomenology that is very near to the heterophenomenology of Dennett. Of course, my views can be challenged, but what I would like to say is the third person perspective is something very important at this juncture or at this present context, because there is a need to see how the third person is reflected in consciousness. Because most of the time we are concerned with our own experience and our own sufferings, and this is a high time for us to see how the others suffer, what is their pain, how do I understand that. And I see that the Buddhist perspective is something which is very close to heterophenomenological approach, because I feel that there are two great philosophers of India who have talked about what is known as the cosmic salvation, or the liberation for the entire cosmos. One is Lord Buddha, and the second is Sri Aurobindo. So their approach, I would say, is somewhat. I am using the word somewhat similar to Daniel Dennett's heterophenomenology. And also here we must mention the great contribution by our Indian thinkers like Jayan Mohanty, Professor R. Balasubramanian, and Beena Gupta. Beena Gupta has written in 2007. She has written a very beautiful and important book on consciousness. Chit, the title of the book is Chit, which approaches consciousness both from Indian as well as a Western perspective. And with regard to Jayan Mohanty, one can say his book published in 1972, that is the concept of intentionality, is one of the pioneer in this approach or in this discussion regarding consciousness, because he's the one who tries to understand phenomenology from both Indian and Western perspective. He is able to see Western phenomenology in Indian perspective, especially applying the Western methodology to Indian context, especially to Advaita Vedanta. So similarly, the contribution of Professor R. Balasubramanian is also important, because he is of the view that the Advaitic phenomenology is something which, according to him, I don't know whether his approach can be accepted fully. He says that the Advaitic approach to phenomenology actually transcends the phenomenology of Husserl. This, of course, this has been debated in many uh, seminars, but we have to see whether that approach would be apt. One of the salient features all of us know in the concept of or the discipline of phenomenology is the notion of consciousness. Consciousness, according to Husserl, all of us know, is intentional. This means there is always off relation. There is some object or other which could be understood through intention. So there is the intentionality of consciousness is the main theme that is reflected in the phenomenology of consciousness of the West. So this means all objects are intentional, which means there is always off relation. There cannot be what we call the bare consciousness. And this is one of the greatest contribution of Husserl. But some Indian scholars like R. Balasubramanian argue that consciousness can be non-intentional also. This actually has, is questioned by many Western philosophers. For example, in Advaitic model, according to R. Balasubramaniam, the method that is used by Indian phenomenologists actually transcends Husserl. How? Well, Professor Balasubramanian says that if somebody analyzes the Mandukya Upanishad, then one can see in the first three states of experience, namely Jagrat, Swapna, and Susupti, consciousness is intentional. Because in the waking stage and in the dream state and also in deep sleep, consciousness is operating. But he says there is the Turiya or the fourth stage where there is no object to be perceived. So, which means consciousness is there, but object is absent. So, by this, Professor Balasubramanian tries to argue that always that there is no condition that consciousness should always be related to some object or other. Because in the fourth stage, that is Turiya, there is no object, but consciousness is operating. He says that it is pure consciousness. Now, this has raised many issues. One of the issues that comes to our mind is whether there can be pure consciousness or what we call a bare consciousness without relating to any object. Now, if we situate Advaita in the context of Vishishtadvaita, for example, one can say that Ramanuja's position or Vishishtadvaita's position is better in various ways because his position, that is Ramanuja's position, comes very close to Husserl's position. For the main reason, like Husserl, Ramanuja also claims that there is always objects are intended, which means there is always consciousness that is related to some objects, or objects are in relation to consciousness. It means there cannot be any what is known as bare consciousness. And Vedanta Desika, for example, a staunch supporter of Vaishnava philosophy or Vishishtadvaita philosophy, questions Shankara or Shankarites by saying that the bare consciousness or abstract consciousness is not at all acceptable. So what I'm trying to say is that the Indian scholars have also debated at length the notion of consciousness raised by the Western context or Western philosophers, and they argue that there is always what we call Indian phenomenology sometimes is defined as transcendental phenomenology, or they say that we means Indian philosophers have gone beyond the Western methodology. Of course, this is a debatable issue, but what is interesting is the phenomenology of consciousness has raised some important issues both in Indian and Western context. So that we have to keep in mind while analyzing these issues, and we have to see whether the traditional phenomenology, the traditional phenomenology means the classical phenomenology taught us by Brenton, Husserl, and Heidegger and others, whether that is acceptable or whether heterophenomenology is a viable method for the philosophers so that they can solve the problems of philosophy, and where in the heterophenomenology we give a space for others. So in this way, I would like to discuss with you these issues which are very important in the context of phenomenology of consciousness. And we have a very great expert in this field. So I would like to shorten my theme note by saying, by welcoming you, all of you once again. And I thank you for your kind presence and participation. And we have got very eminent scholars, and we are very grateful to them for their presence. And of course, their participation and presentation would help us to know more about this topic in detail. So with this, I close, and I would like to request Professor R.C. Synergy, who is the chairman of this session, or who will be delivering this presidential address. And he is very kind enough to accept our invitation, and he would be talking to us on K.C. Bhattacharya's notion of consciousness. Professor Synergy, I welcome you to this.
I extend my namaskar to each and everyone on the screen and off the screen. Really, I'm thankful to Professor Paneer Selvam. Though we had been very close, working together in the ICPR, in the Indian Philosophical Congress, and on many platforms, we had been very close. But since last 6 months, hopefully 6 months, I was not in touch with. I came to Shimla, and before coming to this place, I was in USA. So naturally, I was cut off. So I am rather very, I express my gratitude to Professor Paneer Selvam that he has given me this chance, this platform to meet with our old colleagues, old friends, and certainly I, I, I would like to name Professor R.P. Singh, Professor Mao, Professor Srikala, to whom I know closely, intimately. I may forget some of the names, but I remember most of the persons. Somehow or other, my memory does not bluff me. So, as far as I remember, I have written one article, Philosophizing as a Method of Cognitive Inward Digestion, based on K.C. Bhattacharya's conception of consciousness. And that is in honor of Professor R.P. Singh. Hopefully, Professor Balram Singh invited me to write on this. So, and again, I got the chance to speak on K.C. Bhattacharya. As a matter of fact, I like the thoughts of K.C. Bhattacharya. Though it is sometimes it is said that it is very difficult, sometimes it is unapproachable. So, but while writing about K.C. Bhattacharya, I could not feel much difficulty. I don't know how I developed fascination. Today, the topic which Professor Paneer Selvam has selected. So naturally, it is difficult for me. Difficult for me in the sense that up to the linguistic analysis, that is okay. But phenomenology is not, I'm not well aware of. So I selected K.C. Bhattacharya and his theory of consciousness. But Professor Paneer Selvam has made my task very easy because he has mentioned Advaitic conception of phenomenology. I don't know whether uh, K.C. Bhattacharya is certainly not a phenomenologist, but he's, he is a metaphysician. But his approach to theory of consciousness is a remarkable one. So, K.C. Bhattacharya was primarily influenced by the thoughts of Immanuel Kant, who made the distinction between phenomenon and noumenon. So, on the one hand, K.C. Bhattacharya was deeply influenced by Kant, and on the other hand, he was equally influenced by Vedantic thought. And in his concept of philosophy, K.C. Bhattacharya has reconciled Kant and Vedanta. Kantian philosophy and Vedantic philosophy he reconciled, and he has evolved his own concept of philosophy. So, K.C. Bhattacharya says that certainly philosophizing is a cognitive process. Philosophizing is cognitive inwardization. The title which I have given earlier. So philosophy is expression of the theoretic consciousness. So K.C. Bhattacharya has toned down the agnostic philosophy of Immanuel Kant. Kant streamlines the limits of reason, and Kant adheres that noumena, or the ultimate reality is unknown and unknowable. K.C. Bhattacharya takes help of Vedantic philosophy, and he adheres that ultimate reality is unknown, no doubt. It is beyond the comprehension of reason. It goes beyond intellect, comprehension of the intellect. It is unthinkable, but it is knowable. It cannot be unknown, it is knowable. So he marks a improvement. Kant's philosophy admits that reason cannot go beyond certain limits. But K.C. Bhattacharya, partly agreeing with Kant, he tones down the agnostic philosophy of Kant. That is a sort of contribution that ultimate reality, which Kant says that it is unknown and unknowable, and K.C. Bhattacharya says that it is unknown, no doubt, but it is knowable. So, K.C. Bhattacharya, when says that philosophy is the expression of theoretic consciousness, he has classified the theory of consciousness. So roughly, we have got 4 grades of theoretic consciousness. The one is empirical consciousness or empirical thought. Empirical thought, objective thought, spiritual thought, or spiritual consciousness I can say, and transcendental consciousness. So, according to in the Indian framework, we can take recourse to K.C. Bhattacharya and discuss the problem of the concept of consciousness. Actually, in the Harvard University, there is one department, Department of Consciousness. Those who have visited Harvard University, so it's separate department, but in India we don't have. So naturally, in India, cognitive in psychology we have cognitive faculty of cognitive science in Allahabad also, from where Professor R.P. Singh comes, and our elder friend Professor Janak Pandey established the cognitive faculty of the cognitive science in Allahabad, and I don't know about other places. So I was talking about that K.C. Bhattacharya has streamlined 3 grades, 4 grades of theoretic consciousness, or 4 grades of consciousness. One is the empirical. So empirical consciousness operates in the field of science, or we can say empirical consciousness is related to phenomenological consciousness. So phenomenological consciousness, certainly we can equate it with the empirical consciousness of K.C. Bhattacharya, but three other grades: objective consciousness, spiritual consciousness, and the transcendental consciousness. So in empirical consciousness, there is a relation between the subject and object. The subject A is related to B. So K.C. Bhattacharya says that in empirical consciousness, we think about fact. So fact, and in objective consciousness, there is a self-subsistent. So philosophy starts at the level of self-subsistent, and science is confined to facts. So self-subsistent, there is a difference between fact and the self-subsistent. Fact is a fact in relation to some other fact. But self-subsistent is just beyond time and space. Horseness is beyond time and space. That is a concept. But horse lives in time and space. So there is according to Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya, in his concept of philosophy, he has stipulated that philosophy starts at the level of self-consistent. And the third grade of consciousness is spiritual consciousness. A spiritual consciousness in which I am aware of myself. In Vedantic terminology, in Upanishadic terminology, we can say that Aham Brahmasmi. Aham Brahmasmi, that is according to K.C. Bhattacharya, that is a spiritual consciousness. That is not transcendental consciousness. And perchance, Paneer Selvam talks with reference to Balasubramaniam, he has mentioned about the pure consciousness. But Kesi Bhattacharya has very specifically stipulated that Aham Brahmasmi is at the level of spiritual consciousness. And Shankar's, he has parted, he rather, he differs with Shankaracharya in Shankaracharya's philosophy. In Shankar's Advaitic consciousness, we simply talk about Aham Brahmasmi. So, Kesi Bhattacharya says that Aham, I lingers in the third grade of consciousness, or this at the spiritual level of consciousness, I lingers. So, Shankaracharya thinks that when I am identified with the Brahman, the duality, the trace of duality is over. And he says that the Advaita philosophy is a non-dual or Advaita. So here we find that Kesi Bhattacharya makes a significant departure. He has very clearly mentioned that in Shankar's Advaitic consciousness, in I consciousness, and the I lingers, and there is a trace of duality. Not duality as we find in the Sankhya philosophy. There is nothing like duality, but the trace of duality, because I, Aham, lingers. So he talks about that at the final stage of the consciousness, we have to negate the I too. And that will be a pure consciousness. I hopefully Professor Paneerselvam mentioned this highest stage of Advaitic stage, but Kesi Bhattacharya does not subscribe that Shankar's views of consciousness. As far as I understand, Shankar remains limited to Aham Brahmasmi, or the I consciousness. That, according to Shankar, that is the highest stage of consciousness. But that is, Kesi Bhattacharya negates the I, and he talks about the absolute consciousness, pure consciousness. So now, philosophizing is a cognitive inwardization. So we see that in the grades of theoretic consciousness, how we start from empirical level to the transcendental level. And hopefully, since Professor Ramesh Chandra Pradhan is here, and he has written one book I saw in the library of Indian Institute of Advanced Study yesterday, but I could not get opportunity. I could not get time to read it and get. But the book I got it issued. So since he is there, Professor R.P. Singh is there. So with these words, I must congratulate the organizers, and especially the Professor Paneerselvam, who is a very important figure, who is organizing Chennai Philosophical Forum. He is the key figure, though Professor Balasubramaniam started. And perchance I must mention that when I was the chairman of the Indian Philosophical Council, so we also started Philosophy Study Circle, and now it has flourished, and in most of the universities people are conducting philosophy study circle. This idea was given by my teacher, Professor Rajendra Prasad ji, when he came to Patna, and I cannot talk about philosophy study circle or any study circle without mentioning his name, because he uh, he initiated philosophy, Patna Philosophy Study Circle. Professor Balasubramaniam, he initiated in Chennai, and in this way, the stalwarts of that time, they started a study circle of certainly it is contributing a lot in deliberating philosophical problems. With these words, I thank very much. I thank you.
Uh, Thank you very much, Professor Sinaji, for your excellent presentation, excellent talk, uh, namely A.C. Bhattacharya's concept of consciousness. It is very interesting to note that from your talk we can understand how ACB has seen the notion of consciousness uh, from Indian standpoint. Of course, there is always an argument, the undercurrent of KCB's approach uh, uh, is based on, or it depends on the Kantian notion of approach. And very rightly, you have shown the significance. That is, in fact, you have given us some new direction to work on this theme, namely KCB's understanding of consciousness. And one can relate this notion of consciousness of KCB to the Western phenomenology, and one can see whether we can accommodate him or whether he transcends the methodology of Husserl, Heidegger, and others. So definitely it is a very thought-provoking address, sir. And we are very grateful to you for your kind presence and your presentation. And all of us know that you are in Shimla and you are very busy with your academic activity. Yesterday also, I know that you were in one seminar. But in spite of that, based on our request, you are very kind to be with us, and definitely you have given us a new methodology for understanding consciousness seen from KCB's approach. Thank you very much, Professor Binaji. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I now request Professor R.P. Singh
Yes, sir.
to make his presentation.
I want to share my screen.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So, and
let me, in the meantime, introduce Professor R.P. Singh. Of course, he doesn't need any introduction, but from our side, it is our responsibility to say a few words about the speaker. And all of us know that he taught us. He taught in JNU for quite some time, and then now he is Dean, Faculty of Humanities and Religious Studies, Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar. And he has written number of books, especially both on Western and Indian. I remember his wonderful book on consciousness, which is voluminous one, and which actually deals with both Indian and Western perspective of consciousness. And also he is very much familiar with modern philosophical movements, especially postmodernism is his favorite area, and his knowledge about Heidegger as well as Derrida, Habermas is something remarkable. And I'm very happy that he was very kind enough to accept our invitation to deliver the inaugural address. Now I request Sir to deliver it.
12th annual celebration, and I remember 5 or 6 annual celebrations I had participated in it. So it's always a great pleasure and privilege for me, to be with the kind of group of intellectuals you have motivated, and you are still motivating all of us in very many ways. I've modified little bit the theme of my presentation. Initially, it was absolute consciousness, but now it is pure consciousness and phenomenological consciousness. Realm between inward and outward intentionalities. So, this is what is all about. So, I don't know what has gone wrong because whatever I am speaking is coming on the screen also. So, we are living in the world of technology and everything. So, thank you, Professor Paneerselvam,
Sure.
and for choosing this theme, particularly phenomenological consciousness. And when I started looking at the problem of it, then I found that you know we, I think everybody has some kind or the other phenomenological consciousness because Vyavhara matters. The empirical world does matter. And if you are concerned with in any way, and you definitely everybody is concerned with the phenomenological world that appears to us in a way that cannot be negated at all. The only thing is how to articulate it and elevate it to the transcendental realm, or what is called from Vyavharik Sat to Paramarthik Sat. Because if you have a responsibility towards Vyavhara, the empirical world, you have a responsibility towards the transcendental world or the transcendent also. The Paramarth is also what matters a lot. But none of the realms exclusively, will be of much help to us. And where we are, when we are placed in this world, in the world of Vyavhara and Paramartha, then basically we are living in the realm between two worlds. We are not all the time in the Paramartha, we are also not all the time in the empirical world. We are somewhere in the realm between Paramartha and Vyavhara, from the two kinds of worlds. And here I have taken up that two-dimensional world, inward and outward. I'll explain it. So human life is what is said in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad in terms of standing in this intermediate condition. One sees both these conditions, namely being in this world and being in the other world. Professor K.C. Professor Murthy, K.S. Murthy, in his book The Realm Between, he had started with this kind of a passage, but I have pursued the argument in a different direction. Thus, the realm between two intentionalities falls at the juncture, tasmin sandhi asthane, ubhay asthane, of transcendent as well as the immanent, the paramarthic and the vyavharik, are pure and the phenomenological. In a situation like this, one is able to see both the witness consciousness and the embodied consciousness. Being aware of transcendence and immanence, to be pointed out that it is to be pointed out that the difference between transcendent and immanent is a matter of degrees, not of the kind. These are not two separate worlds. We are in the same world. So the notion of absolute is the first term I would like to explain. And I can also say that this is what is the pure consciousness. And this can be articulated in three ways. One is the psychological way of looking at it, the other is cosmological, and the third one is theological way. The second one is theological. So either we can begin with our own analysis into what goes in our mind, or the antakarana, man, buddhi, chitta, sakshin, and try to find the absolute in us. The sakshin is the witness of the episodes of waking, dreaming, and the deep stage, deep sleep. One can begin with an estimation of the world outside and try to establish an absolute causality operating in nature, or we can resort to God as the ultimate unifying force between the inner world and the outer world. Rene Descartes, in search of certainty in philosophy, he started with the method of doubt regarding the outside world, and arrives at the certainty of cogito. From cogito, Descartes says Descartes, we can arrive at the conception of God, which is the cause of the cogito, and then to the world. Spinoza has another way of doing it, and Kant has yet another way of doing it. The Upanishadic notion of consciousness is expressed in a very crisp manner in the Mahavakyas. So they deal with the pure consciousness neither in the Cartesian way nor in the Spinozistic. Shankara, for instance, subordinated the world and God to the self. As KCB says that he is trying to subordinate it to the aham kind of a thing, not to the world or the God. The Mahavakyas, in brief, are the different paths of self-realization of the Absolute, and the statement Pragyanam Brahma directs the seeker to meditate on the Chitta Sarupa, pure consciousness of Brahman, leading to the merger of the individual consciousness in the universal and the attainment of Mukti, liberation from the worldly bondage. And the state of supreme bliss, Paramananda, Aham Brahmasmi, is an endeavor to make the pupil engage in deep meditation to analyze the Absolute. In Tattvamasi, the teacher is trying to make his pupil realize that his innate being is part of the Absolute. Whatever is, and for the consciousness. I am Atma Brahma is likewise the same kind of a thing. Now, there are three questions that come to us. The first one is, can consciousness and intentionality be explained separately? This is one of the fundamental questions. Or consciousness and intentionality are somehow connected, and explaining the one is the key to explaining the other. Second question is, what relation of consciousness and intentionality, if any, underlies the values we accord ourselves and others, like freedom, autonomy, compassion, non-violence, human rights, recognition, justice, democracy, duty, etc. And the third one is, what relation of intentionality would give consciousness a central epistemological role as a subject of knowledge and agent of moral action? I would like to deal with these three questions in a very implicit manner. So the pure consciousness and intentionality is the first one, which I'd like to go into the deeper aspect of it. Okay, so related with these three stages of consciousness, there is the problem of intentionality and self-consciousness. The first question which I had raised. One of the Vedantins, Ramanuja, for instance, regards these three states as double intentional. On the one hand, it is intentional towards the subject. On the other, it is intentional towards the object, the inward and the outward. So if it is intended towards the search for the self, then it is inward. If it is intended towards of the object, about the object, it is outward. But the other Vedantins, including Shankara, believe that consciousness by its nature is not intentional. However, it becomes intentional because of its association with the mind, with iksha, anuviksha, and pariksha, etc. In the Mandukya Upanishad, at waking state of consciousness, at the waking state, consciousness is intentional, outward. It is in relation to the several objects and their mechanisms and operations. These objects in their properties and relationships act on our senses and the mind. The first condition of objective knowledge, according to Shankara, is A, that an object should possess a generic unity with specific differences. And I can quote it, an object can be known only when it is differentiated from things other than itself, unquote. We can identify an object only under the condition in which we can differentiate the object from rest of the objects. We can know the table, its size, its color, etc., only if we distinguish it from the rest of the things. The category of substance attribute therefore implies for its application a plurality of things that should at the same time belong to the same genus. P. The characteristics of an object such as generic unity and specific qualities, actions, etc., are, it is asked elsewhere, are the conditions of intelligible discourse. Sankara has also said every word employed to denote a thing can only do so insofar as it is associated with certain gunas, certain genus, and or certain acts or certain quality or mode of relation, etc. Now in the avasthatraya, uh, our consciousness becomes aware of things. What is true of the waking level is true to a great extent at the dream level, because in dream experience, consciousness encounters the object. The Mandukya Upanishad brings the association of consciousness with the mind, senses, body, and things at the waking level, and the association of consciousness at the two levels, waking and dreaming states. This also involves the knowledge situation, that is Triputi Jnana, the subject, the object, and the means of knowledge.
Sir,
At
Namaskar, sir.
waking,
Sir, your screen is shared, sir. Please just check which slide you are in, huh? Because I was out. Just, sir.
okay, so I'll just share this is, yeah. So this is this again is a problem. So maybe it is 8th or 9th kind of question, entitled as Avasthatraya. Okay, is it visible to you? So this also involves knowledge situation, that is Triputi Gyan, the subject, the object, and the means of knowledge. At waking level, there is knowledge situation, pragya, which is outward. At the dream level, the similar knowledge situation is there, but not the same knowledge situation. So there is a difference of degrees. Consciousness at the waking level is called Vishwa, at the dream level it is called Taijasa, and at the deep sleep level it is called Susupti, it is called Pragya. These are three different terms used for consciousness depending on its three involvements in the outside world, outward intentionalities. At the deep sleep level, we are not aware of the objects of the outside world or anything internal, because the mind as mind is not functioning at this level. At this level, we do not have a knowledge situation. We are free from all desires, is what the fifth mantra of Mandukya Upanishad declares. Consciousness is uniformly present in all the three stages of consciousness. The body and the senses are present at the waking level, but these are absent at the dream level. Even the mind is absent at the deep sleep level, but consciousness is present at all the three levels of experience. Consciousness is the witness of all the three episodes, but consciousness as such cannot be known under the knowledge situation, just as tongue cannot taste itself. This is the fourth state, the nameless, that is Turiya. It is the state where consciousness is left to itself, trans-empirical, trans-rational, trans-linguistic. Now, consciousness, the hermeneutic perspective, particularly the Upanishadic hermeneutics. There are so many statements in the Upanishads which are so paradoxical, puzzling, symbolic, suggestive, and aphoristic that we cannot understand them without interpretation. Just to illustrate this point briefly, here, let me take up Isavasya text 5, which says, I quote, that moves, that doesn't move, that is far up, that is very near, that is inside all this, and that is also outside all this. It is in this context that hermeneutics has been used to clarify the obvious paradoxes. Shankara comments on this text like this, quote, "The meaning of the text is that though in itself the supreme reality is motionless, it seems to move. Moreover, it is far off because it is unattainable by the ignorant even in hundreds of millions of years. It is very near indeed to the men of knowledge. The reason for this is as follows. Being their very self, it is also very nearby. It is inside everything as stated in the basic text. The self that is within all, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, is inside this world consisting of name, form, and activity. It is outside this, all this, because it is all pervasive like ether. And it is inside because it is extremely subtle. We have several paradoxical sentences occurring in Bhagavad Gita also, with hands and feet everywhere, with eyes, hands, heads, mouths everywhere, with hearing everywhere. That Brahman, which is to be known, exists involving all that. One obviously knows that hands, feet, hearing, mouth, etc. belong to this world. We require hermeneutics to explain the aphorisms and the paradoxes therein, shining by the functions of all these organs, it without the organs, unattached, it supporting all, devoid of qualities, but is also the enjoyer of everything. So there is in-depth study of this kind of an episode by in Gaudapada, Sankara, and others down to Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo. And Mandukya Upanishad does the same kind of thing. Now I come to the realm between inward and outward intentionalities. That is the first area I have it. I think there is some noise is coming. So yeah, it's okay. So should I proceed? Is it okay?
Your screen is also visible.
Okay. So if Pratyaksha has validity so far as empirical world is concerned, Vyavharik Sat is true so far as outward is concerned. Scripture has validity to what is transcendental, Paramarthik Sat, the inward. Shankara says that an object which has got certain quality, generic feature, jati, is involved in action, karma, has some kind of a relation with something else, sambandha, or which has name and form, nam and roop. No, these are all phenomenological in nature. This is all about empirical world, the outward. There is a complete breakdown of language in the case of supreme reality, because it does not have a jati, guna, etc. It does not even have a name. These are simply the contextual forms that are required to convey what ordinarily cannot be conveyed. It is inward. At the most, we can describe it negatively by a negativa. There is no other way, no other than anything outside, no other than anything inside, is the way that Turiya Upanishad is described in the seventh mantra of Mandukya Upanishad. The question arises, how does Turiya state differ from that of Susupti state? Turiya state could be a mystical stage. It is inward, adrishtam, avyavharyam, agrahyam, alakshanam, achintam, shantam, shivam, advaitam, etc. It is at this stage that Atman is to be entirely identified with the Brahman. In other words, if I am the Atman and Atman is the absolute, then it follows syllogistically that I am the absolute, Aham Brahmasmi. Phenomenological perspective on consciousness. Phenomenology, in fact, Professor Panir Silom had given a detailed picture of it. So, meaning that which appears, and meaning study is primarily concerned with making the structure of consciousness and the phenomena which appear in acts of consciousness, objects of systematic reflection and analysis. Such reflection was to take place from a highly modified first person perspective, uh, first person viewpoint, studying phenomena not as they appear to my consciousness, but to any consciousness whatever. In this discourse, intentionality is the most operative term. Originally, intentionality was a concept from the scholastic philosophy. The concept of intentionality was later reintroduced in the 19th century by the philosopher and psychologist Brentano, who defined intentionality as one characteristic of mental phenomena by which they could be distinguished from physical phenomena. Using such phrases as reference to a content or the direction towards an object or the immanent objectivity. There is a little bit of historical background to intentionality. Brentano, more than anybody else, is responsible for keeping the term intentional alive in philosophical discussion of the last century or so, with something like its content current use, and was much concerned to understand its relationship with consciousness. However, it is worth noting that Brentano himself was very aware of the deep historical background to his notion of intentionality. He looked back through scholastic discussions crucial to the development of Descartes' immensely influential theory of ideas, and ultimately to Aristotle for his theme of intentionality. One, one may well go further back to Plato's discussion in the Sophists and the Theaetetus of difficulties in making the sense of false belief, and yet further still to Parmenides. Parmenides' attempt to draw momentous consequences from his alleged finding that it is not possible to think or speak of what is not. The philosophical basis of Brentano, Sartre, and Heidegger was laid down by Kant's transcendental synthetic unity of apperception with its reinterpretation in Hegel's absolute spirit. What is, and for the absolute. Phenomenological consciousness, that is outward intentionality. The outward intentionality of being of or about things, the aboutness or directedness of mind or states of mind to things, objects, events, or in Husserlian Husserlian terminology is expressed in terms of life world or lived experience of temporality, bracketing, or setting aside assumptions, typification, reduction, epoche, noema, noesis, enhancing intersubjectivity, empathy, knowledge, etc. Phenomenologists like Sartre and Heidegger have rejected the method of epoche because everything cannot be bracketed. How do the relevant intentionality making senses of these words about, of, directed differ from thought or experience lies in its capacity to relate to objects as a kind of directedness, aboutness, offness. Intentionality is of objects. It is explanatorily derived but distinguishable from the objects, but not separable from the consciousness. Intentionality outward and inward. The outward intentionality includes sense experience and imagery mental phenomena, that is episodic thought, memory, and emotion, somehow to a subject. Consciousness is not a property of the body, otherwise, like properties of material things, it could be perceived by others. The mind of Western psychology roughly corresponds to buddhi, intelligence, knowledge, antakarana, ego, manas, mind, taken together and often called antakarana or the inner sense in Vedanta philosophy. Consciousness could be regarded as the witness or sakchin of the series of intentionalities. The peculiarity of this kind of directedness, aboutness, offness of lies in its capacity to relate thought or experience to objects, whereas consciousness is the witness of all these events, entities. Consciousness is what it is. It is the witness of intentionalities, is underived but inseparable from intentionality and essentially intentional. KCB has also, in fact, Professor Sinha has gone into the details of it. I'll just put one brief slide on it. That in consonance with Vedantic consciousness at Turiya state, KCB Bhattacharya proposes I consciousness like Aham, not God, nor the world. This intuited self-identity is self-evident. This is the realization of the absolute self and the freedom. KCB thus advocates absolute freedom and it can be realized and felt, but its explanation is an act of inwardization. So, in fact, one of my friend Jonathan Ganeri, he is now he has written a book on inwardness. Very good book. So I've gone through some of the pages, not complete. Inwardness is fascinating text book. It is theoretic cognitive process with theoretic expression, not just the self-realization through anubhuti, the way we find it in Vedanta. Thus expanding the horizon of consciousness in Vedanta. It is known itself as I without being meant by I, indicate the depth of the subject with the logic of the infinite. When the speaker expresses itself in I, it indicates freedom of the subject as it disassociates from the object. To begin with the consciousness of the human being, we have to begin with human body. That is the vital force, the senses, the antakarana, the internal organ, popularly known as mind, endowed with buddhi, of intellect, with ahankara, that is I. Deeper than ahankara, the Vedantins have an entity that is consciousness, chit, chaitanya, samrit, or the self. In the German idealist tradition, for instance, there is no such distinction between ego, mind, spirit, self, or consciousness. These terms have similar meanings. However, Husserl has given a distinction between ego, cogito, and cogitata. These are the tripartite stages involved in Husserl's phenomenology: descriptive stage, transcendental stage, and egological stage. In the descriptive stage, issues are raised. Everything around us is an object of consciousness. It is because of consciousness that we are aware of the objects and ideas and so on. What is so fundamental at this stage is that a distinction has been drawn between consciousness and the objects of consciousness. Husserl begins with several functions of consciousness, such as consciousness objectivates, identifies, supplements, unifies, etc. Husserl has made a distinction between pure ego and empirical ego, between transcendental ego and the psychological ego. But there remains a fundamental difficulty, that is, the distinction between consciousness, ego, mind, etc., have not been clearly defined in the German idealism, including Husserl's phenomenology. But this problem no longer exists in Vedanta. The functions that Husserl assigns to consciousness, like objectifying, unifying, etc., are all the functions of ahankara, antakarana, under the witnessing act of consciousness. In the antakarana, the antakarana is material and it requires the witnessing act of spiritual force, that is consciousness. The sense organs can work properly under the close relationship with antakarana, which in turn has to be guided by the consciousness. In his commentary to Brahma Sutra, Shankara refers to the I thou problem in the Adhyasa Bhas. That is Asmat Yusmat problem. Asmat is the self and Yusmat is the other than the self, in which comes the mind, senses, body, things of the world. Any claim regarding affirmation or negation made for anything in the world presupposes evidence provided by the consciousness by means of pramana. Not only that, even the ultimate presupposition of all pramana, perception, inference, verbal testimony, etc., is provided by consciousness. Given the consciousness, all pramanas operate. Absence of consciousness, no pramanas work. So, two more slides. On the cognition of consciousness as the ultimate reality, that the three Upanishad says, this is the last slide, that from which our speech turns back along with mind, being unable to comprehend its fullness is the ultimate reality. Kenopanishad says that where the eye is unable to go, where neither speech nor mind is able to reach, that conception can be have of it, except that it is beyond. There is somebody. So, and that where the eye is unable to go, where neither speech nor mind is able to reach, that consciousness can we have of it. What kind of what conception can we have of it, except that it is beyond all that is known and beyond all that is unknown. Shankara and Hegel would agree with each other that the comprehension of being as immanent in all the categories is the most fundamental category of all. Shankara, in his commentary on Chandogya Upanishad, says that existence or being, it is asked, is pure, subtle, infinite, all pervading, one taintless, indivisible whole. On the concept of pure being, Hegel also has to say the same thing. Pure being is complete indeterminacy, absence of all qualities, a vacuity, and empty concept. Being is the most irrepressible category for both Hegel and Shankara. Hegel's spirit is the unity which realizes itself in the differences, and it is not in which all differences are lost, like that of Schelling. For Hegel, nothing could be external to the spirit, but as spirit exists through its opposition to the other, which is at the same time sublates, and this process goes on until it reaches to the absolute unity. Whether this state of absolute monism is to be intellectually apprehended, as Hegel does, or expressed in self-realization, as Shankara does, both perspectives are the same spiritual progress. Now, this is the last one, concluding remark. We need phenomenological consciousness to understand, articulate, and express the horizontal reality in terms of earthly existence, social nexus, spatio-temporal frame, historical and actual life of humanity. It has provided us a system of thought and experience which has endured for millennia and awarded us with freedom, autonomy, and sovereignty. At the same time, we need pure consciousness with Sakchin as the change of perspective for the vertical elevation. Let us leave Aristotle, Kant, Hegel, and even Husserl and get out of the Enlightenment frame of mind and go to the Upanishads. There is no other way of detoxifying ourselves from the fumes of Enlightenment rationality, because the Western way is not the only way of thinking and experiencing. Let us as Indians immerse ourselves in our own rich Upanishadic heritage to decolonize ourselves. The grim and anxious days through which the whole world is undergoing today, it is all the more pertinent to address the problems of nuclear capability, war, refugees, migration, Holocaust, Auschwitz, environmental degradation, artificial intelligence surveillance, etc., and to propose peace with no alternative. We need inward intentionality to evaluate our responsibility for the whole world, to get not tyrannized by it. Stay critical, but do not reject out of hand what seems strange at first. So, in fact, phenomenological awareness will make us aware of what is going on, the war, the warlike situation, the fear, the worry, the nuclear warfare, and all that. But then the witness consciousness will deep inside tell us that look, we have to refrain from all these things. The world has to change. I think we need both the states of awareness, consciousness, pure consciousness, and also the phenomenological consciousness. Thank you again, Professor Panir Silvam and everybody. Sorry for this PPT problem and some other issues which came up in between. So being at home, these issues arise. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor R.P. Singh, sir, for your very excellent presentation.
Thank you,
In
sir.
fact, the way you are able to connect both Indian and Western, and finally coming to a conclusion that Indian methodology is better, seems to be okay. I mean, okay in the sense that there is, I mean, still I have a fear
Observations, yeah.
that there is always ontological leap which we are
Yeah,
taking in Indian phenomenological approach. But you have done it in a beautiful way that has to be acknowledged, and we appreciate that. Of course, all of us know that you are one scholar who is well versed both in Indian and Western phenomenological tradition, and towards the end you have shown the importance of phenomenological consciousness or awareness, which is very much essential for solving many of our problems of life. And this is a very, very beautiful presentation, and we are very grateful to you. And we also feel very sorry that the initial stage that the PPT was not. I mean, we are not able to help you, and I also tried, but somehow. But in fact, we could gain a lot of information from your talk, and it's a very, very extensive talk for which we are grateful to you. Thank you very much, sir, for your kind presence and a very nice presentation. And we hope that in future also you will support us
yeah, of course.
by making presentation in all our conference. And also we are planning to publish the proceedings, and we'll
Okay.
be approaching you at the right time to get paper from you. Thank you very much, and you are always our friend, so we have
Yeah.
every right to demand something from you, and you have been very much kind enough to accept all our
Yeah.
requests. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have the keynote speaker, Professor R.C. Pradhan, one of the eminent philosophers of this country, who is well known, and he is also well versed both in Indian and Western philosophical tradition. Of course, his love for analytical philosophy is something well known. But we are all happy that he has come to Indian philosophy also. He has been doing a lot of Indian philosophical methodology and applying it to Western tradition, something remarkable. Recently, I heard him speaking on Wittgenstein and Bhartrhari, which was very, very interesting. And recently, he has published a book on metaphysics of consciousness. I think the title is right. It's a very, very wonderful approach he has made, both Indian and Western philosophical tradition. And we are happy that Professor Pradhan was kind enough to accept our invitation. In fact, he has been nominated as the General President for the centenary year celebration of IPC to be held at IIT Mumbai in December. And we are always grateful to Professor Pradhan for he always accepts our invitation, and he is with us in all our endeavors, academic endeavors especially. Thank you very much, Professor Pradhan. Now I request Professor Pradhan ji to make his presentation.
Thank you, Professor Sinha, the president of this webinar, and Professor Panir Selvam, the organizer of this seminar, and all esteemed scholars in the audience. I'm really very much grateful to Professor Panir Selvam for inviting me to this very important webinar on phenomenology of consciousness, both Indian and Western perspectives. I have decided to speak on phenomenology as a philosophy of consciousness, mostly from the Western perspective, precisely because phenomenology has originated from the West, and it is, in any case, rooted in the Western tradition itself. Though we are very happy to know that our previous speakers, both Professor Sinha and Professor Singh, have highlighted how we can approach consciousness from the Indian perspective. There is no doubt that there can be a confluence between these two traditions, both Western and the Indian, though there may not be one-to-one correspondence between the two, but yet the codes of phenomenology can be heard in the corridors of Vedantic theory of consciousness. Anyway, let me try to recapture what phenomenology has done as a philosophical theory of consciousness, starting from Husserl and ending nowhere, excepting because it is a continuous tradition, so we cannot say where it ends. But it ends in multiple ways of understanding phenomenology, even in the West. The phenomenology of Sartre or the phenomenology of Merleau-Ponty or the phenomenology of Dan Jahavi are not the same. I will really try to recapture the basic problem which phenomenology as a philosophical movement started. Why Husserl came back to consciousness, and what was the situation then in the philosophical environment in the early 20th century that Husserl had to either endorse or to oppose. As we know, that Husserl's phenomenology was a reaction against the implicit phenomenology or empirical phenomenology or psychological phenomenology of Brentano. And he derived the spirit of phenomenology, no doubt from Kant, who really introduced the idea of the transcendental philosophy. So Husserl belongs to the tradition of transcendental philosophy, which doesn't start only from Kant, as we can see. It has its roots, if not in any place, it must be in Plato. It is no doubt that Husserl had a great Platonic streak in his philosophical inquiry, even into consciousness. His earliest book, The Logical Investigations, are the imprint of the Platonic idea of forms, which in Husserlian literature is called the eidos, or the ideas. Anyway, the point is that there is a long tradition in the West which can claim to be a transcendental tradition or transcendental philosophical tradition. Husserl is carrying forward the transcendental tradition, which very much is embedded in the Western modern philosophical tradition, beginning with Descartes. Though Husserl complains that Descartes did not carry forward the transcendental movement or transcendental turn, but he was the initiator of the cogito, and that is the beginning of Husserl's own inquiry into consciousness. But it is Kant who really inspired him to go back to the transcendental roots of philosophy. So this will be my emphasis, that transcendental philosophy has to be taken as the broad framework within which Husserl's transcendental phenomenology can be situated. If we detach Husserl or his phenomenology from the Kantian tradition, even we can say, even from the Hegelian tradition, it will be difficult to imagine how phenomenology could progress as a philosophy of infinite task. Husserl defined philosophy as phenomenology as the philosophy of infinite tasks. That means there is no end to the philosophical, the phenomenological inquiry. That is how he approached phenomenology. He also has suggested that philosophy could not but be an inquiry into the ego and consciousness, which is very much rooted in the Kantian transcendental tradition. Why is it that he opposed the naturalism and materialism of his time? These are the twin enemies of transcendental phenomenology. One, naturalism, which goes along with empiricism, and the other is materialism, which goes hand in hand with naturalism. Though there are different forms of naturalism, as we know, the reductive and non-reductive, and materialists are also divided between soft materialist and hard materialist. But all are opposed to, as we can see now in the current literature and consciousness in the West, all are opposed to what Husserl really wanted to do. That is to oppose the very effort to deny that there is an inner world of consciousness and there is a transcendental way of approaching consciousness. These two theses, that consciousness is something inner, that something inward, and second, that consciousness itself has to be understood not psychologically, not neurophysiologically, but through a transcendental method of epoche and the transcendental method of reduction. These are the two innovations of Husserl, the method of epoche and the method of reduction. Both are part of the method called phenomenological method, the transcendental method in a sense, which really takes us back to the inner world of consciousness. Now, in an environment where the inner world itself is questioned, the validity of something inner is questioned, as it is now questioned. I think in Husserl's time also it was questioned. And Husserl's effective answer was the phenomenological approach to consciousness. So his phenomenology was a response to a well-established naturalistic, materialistic, and anti-transcendental way of thinking. In fact, Kant had struggled against this in his own way by bringing in the phenomenology, phenomenal and noumenal distinction, or the phenomenon-noumenon distinction. That was the direct attack on those who really tried to understand consciousness, mind, and reason naturalistically, and those who really believe that there is something which goes beyond the domain of nature, that is, the beyond the domain of our natural experience. So this is the background in which Husserl really started his phenomenological movement. Let us see some of the achievements of that movement, which you can take as our clue to understand the present scenario. And we can go beyond, in fact, invoking the Indian approach to consciousness. Let us see how the Western world is viewing phenomenology right now. That I will come a bit later. Let us see what are the high points of phenomenological movement. One was the discovery of the transcendental ego, which Professor Singh also referred to. The transcendental ego is not the same as the embodied ego or the empirical ego. This was a great discovery for the Western mind, at least during Husserl's time, because Kant had already made the distinction between empirical self and the transcendental self or the nominal self. But the nominal itself was so disturbing to many of these critically minded thinkers that they thought that Kant has gone out of his own critical reasoning to establish something nominal, which cannot be known at all. But the fine lines of distinction between the phenomenon and nomenon was missed by many of the thinkers, those who were skeptical about the nominal reality. But Kant stood steadfastly for his nominal adventure, or his adventure into the nominal. As we know, in this year of 300 years of his birth, that is the previous year, how Kant is being viewed now after 300 years. I think if there is no nominal, then there is no Kant as well. Because without nominal, the real Kant cannot be understood. The Kant of the critic of pure reason is not the only Kant. There are other Kants standing behind. That is, the Kant, the moralist, and the Kant, the teleologist, the Kant, the aesthetician. Anyway, all these inputs have been carried forward by the discovery of the ego by Husserl. He left the embodied ego far behind, precisely because that is not the starting point of his philosophical inquiry. Now, of course, in the post-Husserlian time, the embodied ego has taken the center stage. That is, the ego in the world, or in Heidegger's term, the Dasein, the being in the world has taken the center stage. But that was not the philosophical aim of Husserl. He wanted to go away from or go beyond the embodied ego or the empirical ego. He really rediscovered, rather in a Kantian fashion, he rediscovered the transcendental ego, which is the object of his inquiry. The transcendental ego is first of all detached from the world. That is the aim of epoche. The world or the natural beliefs about the world are bracketed. And we are really cut off from the world. We are not interested in the objective world right now when we are doing phenomenology. So we are detached from that. And the method of reduction has brought back us from the empirical ego to the transcendental ego. And there is the beginning of Husserl's fundamental inquiry into consciousness. Now, if ego is transcendental, the ego consciousness, the I consciousness in our terminology, for example, cannot but be transcendental. It is transcendental in the sense that it is detached from the empirical conditions of consciousness. It is detached from the world itself, which is sometimes taken to be the very home of consciousness, but actually it is not. The ego is the home of consciousness, not the world. So the ego-world distinction is carried forward further, though the world is bracketed, but world as it is there cannot be denied. So Epoche doesn't doubt the existence of the world. It only brackets it. It only brackets, and perhaps it will look back into the world in terms of ego's conditions. That is, ego will now take care of the world, not the world will take care of the ego. So the ego becomes the master of the whole plan of the whole schema, or the whole scheme, the whole transcendental philosophy. So phenomenology is also sometimes called egology, because it is ego concerned philosophy. So in that sense, it is inheriting perhaps the Hegelian spirit, the idea of Hegelian spirit, and also the spirit of the idea of spirit in Fichte. So in a sense, it is a Germanic uh, adventure into the ego. But ego is no more any way concerned, or is not getting its feedback from the world. It's getting its feedback from within itself. All the consciousness is engineered through the ego, are ego dominated or ego directed consciousness. Though consciousness is, as Husserl admitting Brentano's discovery that consciousness is intentional. It is always directed at something else. That something else is what he calls the transcendent. The world or the object itself is something transcendent, whereas consciousness itself is transcendental. He makes a distinction, fine distinction between transcendental and transcendent. But though consciousness is concerned with the world intentionally, intentionality is directedness at the world, but the actual existence of the world doesn't matter. Any object, any imaginary object also will take care of the noesis, noematic distinction, or the intentionality of consciousness. So consciousness is not hostess to the world. Rather than now the world is getting back into consciousness. This is the idealistic move within phenomenology. And that is what we really we are coming back. That this is the greatest achievement of Husserl, that he reasserts the idealistic movement within the Western tradition, especially in the Germanic tradition. That idealism cannot be escaped. Even in the crisis, where we see that perhaps people think the crisis of European sciences, that is a great book, is a counter to his own transcendental project. I think that will be a wrong interpretation of crisis. In fact, there he is expanding the horizon of consciousness by introducing a notion of life world. So life world has really taken a broader platform for understanding phenomenological investigation or phenomenological description, as they say. So in a sense, phenomenology is still only concerned with consciousness as detached from the world. So that way, consciousness remains transcendental, even in the last work of Husserl, that is the crisis. Life world doesn't make a change from within the transcendental framework. Rather, it expands the framework of the ego. The transcendental ego is manifested more in the life world, which is a community of egos, of course. So in that sense, really, we can now see how idealism has come back within Husserl. Many people interpret him as just a realist, but that is not the case. From Cartesian meditation onwards, he's even in the ideas, the great book Ideas 1 and 2, for example, and which are combined into one book, the Ideas. Now, there also idealism remains steadfastly rooted in his philosophy. Why idealism, one can say? Now, there is no other way the world could be understood except in terms of consciousness and the ego. Because the world is dependent on the ego now. All that we know about the world is the meanings that we create about the world through our intentionality. So our intentionality brings the noematic structure of the world. And that noematic structure is also called the meaning of the world. So phenomenology is not concerned with the facts of the world, but with the meanings of the world. Now, this is the way phenomenology has brought back idealism into the main frame of philosophy. Now, one can say whether phenomenology has always to be idealistic. Now, if consciousness is given primacy, I will say it is a metaphysical primacy, not epistemic primacy alone. If consciousness is primary, is primordial, or as Husserl would say, the originary, it is that which is the fundamental reality. Then everything else has to be secondary, has to be a dependent reality. Now, if phenomenology is a phenomenology of consciousness, then in what way Husserl could have really escaped from idealism? The post-Husserlians have really taken Husserl to task for his idealistic move. For example, Merleau-Ponty in Phenomenology of Perception has really said that idealism is not the option. Rather, idealism is not any option at all, because consciousness is already the world. So the world takes primacy, and consciousness becomes a hostess to the world. So in that case, how can there be any idealism? And similarly, in Heidegger, there is no idealism, because his philosophy takes on, though he says it is not existentialist in character, but it takes a move which goes away from consciousness and away towards the world. Now the being is entirely trapped in the world, in the Heideggerian world and Heideggerian time. If being is itself engrossed in time, how can there be any timelessness of the ego? Or how can there be any transcendence of the ego? Then in that case, idealism will be the last option. Now let me come back to the recent phenomenon, why phenomenology is the greatest need of the time. Now, if any philosophy which demands a reinvention or resurgence is Husserlian transcendental philosophy. This is my personal conviction, of course, and there can be any number of objections to that. First point is that naturalism again has come back and has taken the center stage of contemporary investigation into consciousness. It is good that philosophers' mind in the West are very much concerned with consciousness. But which consciousness? If you go by Dennett's Consciousness Explained, which consciousness remains with you? It is only the empirical consciousness, and that again, according to him, is to be explained functionalistically, or in terms of certain brain functions. So where is that transcendental consciousness? As Professor Paneerselvam has very rightly pointed out, the only phenomenology for Dennett is heterophenomenology. And if you study between the lines, heterophenomenology is a denial of Husserlian phenomenology, which we can call first-person phenomenology, but that is not enough. It is a transcendental phenomenology. You have to talk about a transcendental ego if you have to be a Husserlian or a true phenomenologist. But if you are really deviant phenomenologist, yes, of course, one can say that there is a heterological phenomenologist. But that is a joke, really. Many people say Dennett is not serious about consciousness. Dennett's model of the mind, in terms of a computational mechanism, doesn't serve the purpose. However, you may try, that a human brain is not a computer, at least not a calculating computer. It is something more vibrant, more dynamic, and because it is the very mother of computers. Human brain is the mother of science, including the AI science. So in that sense, really squeezing the brain into a computer model will be a great injustice even to the human brain. But anyway, the contemporary theories of consciousness have really deviated from phenomenology as such. Consciousness has been a topic for research, but they approach it from very different angles, which are not phenomenological, which are not first personal. Though Searle brings back first person ontology. And also David Chalmers also brings back first person. Thomas Nagel also brings back first person. But by the time it is too late, we are invaded by naturalism in subtle ways that we cannot escape from naturalism in any sense. And therefore, we cannot go back to transcendentalism as such. So in this scenario, transcendentalism of Husserl, of Kant, is like a far cry in the jungle. In the jungle of materialism, naturalism, and whatnot. The Kant's voice and also Husserl's voice is like a cry in the wilderness. But anyway, this is how phenomenology is a requirement of today. Those who truly believe that consciousness is real, consciousness is inward, consciousness belongs to another world and not just hanging around what we may call the world, as Husserl complains that in Descartes, the consciousness, the I, was only the fringe of the world. But he didn't accept that Cartesian scenario. He said it should not be at the fringe, it should be at the center. So if such a scenario can be, such a Husserlian model can be at all reinvented, re-understood, because nothing is lost in philosophy. Even Plato is not lost. Socrates is not lost. Upanishads are not lost, as Professor Singh has reminded us. We can go back to what is transcendental. If one is an Indian thinker, especially an Advaitic thinker, many of the participants will be speak on Advaita. I am not an Advaita textual scholar, but I have some ideas how people talk about the Brahman, Atman, etc. I think if Advaita is taken seriously, and as Professor Sinha, Professor Singh, Professor Paneerselvam has indicated, that many Advaitins of the past, like Professor Balasubramanian, Professor K.C. Bhattacharya, all have given a new thrust to our understanding of consciousness, of ourselves, and of the self, which Advaita talks about, the Brahman. If all these Advaitic scholars, Advaitic philosophers have taken into account, we can really pose a question to the phenomenologists of the West. Why not you take the Advaitic model? Because Advaitic model doesn't buy any kind of naturalism, any kind of empiricism. Advaitic model goes straight to the transcendental level of consciousness. Okay, empirical consciousness is not denied, but that is not the final truth. That is only Vyavaharika Satta for the Advaitins. So if we take Advaitic spirit of inquiry, Perhaps Husserl and Advaita can come together and join hands in exploring the inner domain of consciousness, both believing in the transcendental method of the inquiry. So given this possible scenario, because as it has been suggested, we Indians, though we cannot join the forces of the West in their own field, but we can create a phenomenological environment by taking clues from our own tradition. So phenomenology as a philosophical inquiry cannot be uh, uh, cannot be bound to the Western tradition only. It can be also taken out, and we can also give it a place in our own tradition. And that is what Professor Jain Mahanti, Professor Devabrata Sinha, and many others who worked in the West and struggled with the Western thinkers have also taken that phenomenology could have a place in the Indian tradition as well. As we know, Indian tradition is always open to any great ideas, whether it is Western or non-Western. We are always welcome. We always welcome new ideas. And here is phenomenology in the Husserlian form of phenomenology will be a great help for us to re-understand our own tradition. I think with these words, I conclude my talk. I thank once again Professor Parit Selvam and all the scholars in the audience for giving me a chance to speak and also for your pleasant hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Pradhanji, for your excellent lecture. It is always a pleasure to listen to you. And this is not our first meet. You have been talking to us in Chennai Philosophical Forum on various themes. And what is significant in this theme, which you have chosen, the keynote address, I mean, is you have situated phenomenology as the philosophy of consciousness, which is something really very attractive. Though the philosophy of consciousness has been replaced by many other modes of thinking. This is something really we can't. You very beautifully pointed out towards the end that how the methodology which the Westerners adopted can be seen in the Indian phenomenology also, because we are open and there is nothing wrong in applying this model and see how we can situate our Indian philosophy and how Western phenomenologists also can learn from Indian tradition. And also, I think if I understood you properly, you said at one place that phenomenology is the philosophy of our times. If that is the statement which you made, I think you are absolutely right. I also have been talking that the phenomenology is a very dominant philosophical discourse, which would dominate for at least for another 200 years because of the special contribution made by Husserl and later developed by others, and especially the post-phenomenologists. That contribution is something remarkable. And also, I liked your presentation when you are explaining to us that how the transcendental philosophical tradition in the West is something remarkable. And also, you said that the transcendental philosophical tradition is a broad spectrum in which we can situate Husserl's phenomenological standpoint. And also, you have shown us that how naturalism and materialism has been rejected by the Western phenomenological discourse. And also, you have said a lot of very interesting points. For example, you have explained in detail the transcendental ego in a very beautiful way. and you have situated the discovery of the transcendental ego in a very novel way. So this talk of yours has given a new methodology of understanding phenomenology of the West. And also, one more point with that I'll stop. That you made a distinction between Husserl's classical or traditional phenomenology and the heterophenomenology of Dennett. And also, you said that Dennett methodology may not be acceptable. In fact, this is a view which many post-phenomenologists have. That is, they say that this Dennett heterophenomenology is not something new. Is in fact going back to the classical phenomenology, and also the phenomenologists like Zekavi also support this kind of approach. Mm, that is Dennett is sometimes is out of context. That's what they say. So, Professor Pradhanji, we are very grateful to you for your very nice presentation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
We really enjoyed, and we are grateful to you for your kind
Thank you so
presence and a good talk which we have received from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Friends, with this, we close the inaugural session. Of course, there is one question. Normally, the inaugural session, we don't allow questions, but this could be a friendly question, friendly way. Pradhanji, can you see? Can you see?
Yeah. I would like to, if there is any question, I would like to
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's one in the chat box. There is one question by
Yeah.
Francisco Philip. Can you read it, or should we read it for you?
Only Ranjan Kumar Panda has raised hands. So
Okay,
let him speak.
this Francisco Philip has asked this question. Respected
No.
sir, you mentioned that the phenomenology is starting from the Western philosophy. I
Yeah.
have the question that it is also discussed many times that phenomenology is a piece from metaphysics. Taking this in mind, I consider that we can also see the phenomenology as having the roots in Indian philosophy, right? That is the question
Yeah.
raised by.
In fact, historically speaking, I am taking the historical perspective. Phenomenology started with very vigorously with Husserl, and it continues in the West. So far as phenomenology in Indian tradition is concerned, we have study of consciousness, of course, but that doesn't mean that it was a phenomenological study of consciousness. So there may be other ways of studying consciousness. For example, K.C. Bhattacharya didn't mention phenomenology, and perhaps none of the traditional scholars really mention phenomenology as a method of inquiry. But we can buy the phenomenology if we say it's a theory of consciousness or a theory of phenomena. For example, etymologically, phenomenology is a theory of phenomena, a logos of phenomena. So if we take it broadly, yes, it is very much rooted in other traditions.
As a discipline, it is a Western one. As a discipline,
As a
phenomenology,
discipline.
the discipline is a Western one.
Started in the West, definitely, because the nomenclature comes from the West.
Yeah.
Though its implications can be worldwide, but the
Yeah.
nomenclature comes from the West.
Yeah.
For example,
Ranjan,
the word, yeah.
Ranjan, you have to say something?
Yes, I just want to.
Off minute, because we are running short of time for the next session.
It is
Please.
just observation, very enlightened talk, sir. On that point which you highlighted is about from first person perspective.
It's not audible to me. Can I?
Am I not audible, sir?
Yeah, please tell.
Yeah.
Now, the idea was about first person perspective to transcendental perspective. For instance, in the case of Zahavi, um, Zahavi talks about a minimal self and minimal subjectivity, and tries to confine himself to the first person perspective. But he has a lot of reservation about the transcendental idea. So it is not just Dennett, but also Zahavi, within a phenomenological tradition, is trying to minimize the scope of transcendentalism. I think that's an observation. So I think it has a lot of scope to talk about how transcendentalism would be in a space for phenomenological studies.
Yes.
Yes, Dan Jahavi has really said in his book Self and Subjectivity, for example, where he talks of minimal self, the experiential self. That is not the Husserlian ego, that is not the Husserlian self. I think all of them are anti-transcendentalist in that sense. So I don't think uh, we can take Jahavi as a true follower of, for example, Husserl. We can take Jain Mohanty as a true follower, a true Husserlian, but not Jahavi. Jahavi has extended self towards, as we know, a minimal self. In Husserl, it is maximal self that he is talking about. A minimal self will not help phenomenology. It can help something else, but not phenomenology, at least in the Husserlian sense. So that will be my response, that they have taken a turn against transcendentalism within the phenomenological tradition.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Pradhan.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank you.
Ranjan.